morning.
Well, we have New Mexico, and we have New Jersey, and we have Florida, 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 okay? It's an exciting election landscape that we have in Florida. It's been ever-changing and very exciting. Dan mentioned that I'm the Rules Committee Chair for it's the Florida State Association of Supervisors of Elections. And the way that works is that we have a committee that monitors the rules. We have as much input as anybody else does because we have rule-making workshops and the public is invited to come. Well, as the rules chairman, at the beginning of this year, after the legislative session, I started getting onto the Division of Elections saying, we need to work on this audit rule. It's really important. And kept after them. Now, in their defense, they had several rules which had an effective date way before this date. They had August 1st effective dates that they had to work on those rules. Don't worry about it. It's not until July 1, 2008. Wait a minute. This is a big deal, and we have got to understand what's going on. So you know what happens when you talk too much? You get a job. Okay, so it was, well, Susan, I got a great idea. Why don't you get together a group of your supervisors and then you can work on this? This would be really helpful. So I said, okay, we'll do that. So we had 17 volunteers out of our 67 supervisors of people who are really committed and wanted to talk about putting really meat on the bones of our new audit law, which is a page and a half. Now, once we started getting information in from other states and I kept looking at this law, I felt somewhat like Alice in Wonderland who had fallen into a big black hole and I couldn't get out. Looking at this, and looking at what other states were doing, I'm saying, how are we doing this? Is this meaningful? And then we got together as an association, the people who wanted to be on the committee, and Ion talked to you a little bit about how this law got on the books in the first place. It was kind of an afterthought. And Ion and I come from counties which are similar. His is a little bit larger than mine, but we'd be considered medium-sized counties. We can do this. This is not a problem. But when we got together with the large counties, they have some really difficult problems. Dan had asked me, what are some of the obstacles? What do the elections officials feel about this? No one's saying we shouldn't do it. No one's saying it costs too much money. No one's saying any of those things. The big question is, how are we going to do this? Okay? How are we going to do this? And is this going to be a meaningful, relevant audit? So we've been working through that. And our big obstacle, again, as I had mentioned to you earlier, is that results by precinct and the number of absentees and early votes that we have coming in. I mentioned that in 2004, in my particular county, 51% of the people who voted prior to Election Day. Now, the way I'm reading this audit law that we have on the books now is that we will have to audit the precinct, which is no problem, that's easy. And then we have to go to the early votes and go through and pick out all the ballots for that given precinct number. And then go, which in the presidential election, I think I had about 15,000 early votes and about 20,000 absentees. So we'll have to go through and pick those out. And then it occurred to me, well, if we're just going to look at them from the machine count, we're not really going to have a meaningful number. It just didn't seem to work for me. Having come here and listened and talked to several of you, I mean, it sounds like it would be better off for us if we would take a precinct and then we took the early votes separate and then we took the early votes separate. I'm so glad to see you shaking your heads. I thought I was crazy. And then have it work that way. So we've got a couple of choices, I think. And initially, when we had our legislative meeting, it was, well, you know, it's an election year, and we're not going to get a lot of legislation, election legislation, because I don't want to rock about too much, ha ha ha. And so that's one way of looking at it. Then the other way is looking at it, well, you know, maybe we ought to go to them and say, you know, based on what we've learned here today and more investigation, and say, look, we think in order to make this meaningful, that we need to do something a little different. And So I think that that's the route we're going to take when I get back, talk to the association and see if we can't get them to understand that, you know, if we want to have something that's meaningful, then we have to do it differently than what's here. So, wish you luck on that one, but because you know, first I have to go to our legislative chair and then, you know, convince them that this is what we need to do. But, you know, as we had our meeting, we had a great meeting of the supervisors discussing, you know, how we were going to do this, and it became so apparent to me that there was some real logistical problems. Because again, in my county, when I had one ballot in English, Miami-Dade was going to have 4 ballots but my one, because of the language requirements and because of the way their government is set up down there in the county. They have a lot of amendments and such. So they definitely have some other challenges that we need to recognize and figure out how we're going to do this that makes sense from a perspective of an audit and also from an election administration. So those are some of the things. As far as looking at it from a supervisor's standpoint, you know, we have to be so security-minded, and we really are, about the ballots. And so even that thought that someone might look at us and say, well, they're being very protective, we're responsible for those ballots. And so it's hard to shift gears. I just want you to understand exactly what we're thinking. And we've got chain of custodies in one sense, that we need all the security on the front side, and then on the back side, we can't just hand out the ballots and say, okay, you know, go ahead and do what you have to do with them. So these are some things that are very, very important to us as election officials. So those are some of the issues that we have. I think the election reality of letting elections officials know that yes, they're going to be fair, honest, accurate, not perfect elections. That's it. And the public has to know that, and elections officials have to be comfortable with that as well. So, stop. Thank you.